Yeah, I'm fortunate enough to kind of mentor a lot of younger career folks in the sustainability space, and it's probably true in any field, not just sustainability, but often the analogy I use, it really is like pushing a boulder up a hill, and when you're totally exhausted and you feel like it's going to roll back over you, sometimes it slowly starts to roll down the other side and create that momentum.
Hi, I'm Tracy Lovejoy.
And I'm Shannon Lucas. We are the co-CEOs of Catalyst Constellations, which is dedicated to empowering Catalyst to create bold, powerful change in the world.
This is our podcast, Move Fast, Break Shit, Burn Out, where we speak with Catalyst executives about ways to successfully lead transformation in large organizations.
And I am thrilled today, and I intentionally sought him out to have Christopher Wellise with us. Welcome, Christopher.
Thanks, Shannon. Great to be with you here on this afternoon.
A little bit of background. Christopher is the Global Vice President of Sustainability for Equinix. He and his team set the sustainability strategy and key targets for the company. They collaborate with the CEO, the CFO, the CRO, operations, and the board, super important, to interpret changes in the external sustainability strategy. Prior to Equinix, he led AWS's global sustainability effort focused on improving company performance and, of course, at AWS, meeting customer needs. Prior to that, he was the Chief Sustainability Officer at Hewlett-Packard Enterprise, where he led the setting of the first science-based supply chain climate target and built a customer-facing sustainability team to deliver revenue. He began his career, which is super interesting because not all sustainability people have this, as an environmental/physical scientist working for the US Department of Interior, studying the impact of investment in pollution control systems on river and estuary ecosystems. You have an incredible sustainability background. I'm so thrilled to have you. All right, so let's jump in because that's just sort of the clinical bio, but we would love to hear from you about your catalytic journey, maybe sharing a few career highlights that you're proud of that help us see your catalytic nature.
Yeah, thanks, Shannon. Well, as you sort of lay that out, it all sounds very intentional, but I assure you a lot of it was sort of quite a bit of stumbling and accidental circuitous pathway that sort of got me to where I am today. But, I think, as we sort of spoke about briefly before, I've largely had this North Star of really working at the intersection of business and environment, and I got involved in that, at a time when really sustainable green companies weren't really a thing. But my passion was how to have impact at scale, and how to really move the needle within businesses. I mean, I actually remember in grad school, I think, a round table my first day when people were talking about what they intended to do from a career perspective. There were lots of folks going into the NGO community and policy and so on. And I talked about what I thought was the need to really work within business. And people really thought, that I was, going to work for the devil at the time because business were not viewed as a positive thing, particularly in the environmental space. Worked my way through research, working with the federal government, as you had mentioned, and got into what was largely a compliance-driven career in those days, working with small and medium-sized businesses, air permitting, water permitting. And, in kind of the early days of sustainability, some of our customers, as I was working as an environmental consultant, began to ask questions like, what does your supply chain look like? Where are you getting your raw materials from? And these were really kind of the origins of the sustainability movement. And then began to continue to do that work, and then went to work and jumped over and worked for one of my clients, who was Sun Microsystem at the time, big tech company who got absorbed by Oracle, but was really a big player back in the early 2000s and late 1990s, and have been in tech ever since.
How it's a fascinating journey, and so many catalysts have like a circuitous, certainly non-direct route. I'm wondering, you mentioned having this North Star and then thinking about where you could have the most impact, and you were comparing that to what some of your other graduate school, colleagues were thinking about. What advice do you have for people about how to align their North Star in a way that maximizes impact? Because there's a lot of potential routes that you could go through.
Yeah, I mean, often I think the intentional path is the most, well, it's difficult, right? Because it largely becomes sort of accidental. So, I think I've had these brief sort of lucky moments in time. Like for instance, when I went to work for HP, I really thought, okay, here is an opportunity. At the time, the company was huge before they split. They were selling 3 or 4 products, a minute everywhere in the world. And I thought if I could change one process in one of those products, that I could really have an impact. Um, but I think it was also largely process of elimination, right? So I had this vision, this North Star of working at the intersection of business and environment, and kept pushing my way into these scenarios where I thought I'd be able to have impact. And sometimes I was able to, and sometimes I wasn't. So I think it's don't get frustrated in the immediate or near term, but understand where you want to be. And it's okay if you stumble or make mistakes or feel like you're not in the right place. You're learning something every step of the way.
It's really good advice, the not getting frustrated piece, and that it's not going to be a clear path. And you hit on something like when I was working on my, sustainable MBA, people were like, "Oh, Walmart is the devil and you can have that opinion." But I had a similar thing, which was like, if you changed 1% of how they operate, you're going to make more impact than all of the social enterprises combined potentially. So I'm just wondering if you have advice for people navigating some of those sort of, North Star value trade-offs about how they work with large organizations and navigate that. Are we making enough progress at this point?
Well, we're never making enough progress, right? So I
Fair.
think, I think, most of us in this field, tend to be missionaries, not mercenaries, right? I mean, I never thought a chief sustainability officer job would ever exist when I first got into this field. I never, frankly, even thought about, you know, salary or income or lifestyle as kind of part of what I was doing. I thought more about how could I have impact. And, I think impatience is good, right? You want to have that impatience. And I think you're always in these situations where you're sort of torn and forced to make decisions and reflect upon your own personal values. And in the end, it's a very personal decision for all of us. And it's sort of it's about balance in the end, right? I certainly have a tremendous amount of respect for my colleagues in research that continued down that path and are in the jungles of Central America or wherever they might be, today continuing to do that work with insects or ecology and so on and so forth. For me, it was having to, I think, adjust to what it's like to work within a large corporation, understand that there are fundamental aspects of capitalism and production and manufacturing and those impacts, and then adjust and decide where you can make a difference.
Super cool. Yeah, spot on. So you sort of touched on this, but in your own words, how do you relate to the concept of catalyst, and maybe how do you see that connecting to you being a successful catalyst executive?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're all probably catalysts in our own way, right? It's a matter of scale. I mean, you could be a catalyst within your own family unit, or if you're a teacher within a school. Um, it doesn't necessarily need to be at a global large scale within a big company.
Totally.
I think it's sort of a way of thinking. It's not a matter of measurable impact necessarily, because sometimes that impact's hard to measure. I
Yeah.
mean, if you impact one student in a class as a teacher, that could have a ripple effect that can last for generations. So I think it's more of a mindset. And I think when you and I talked about it, I think I've always probably been born with sort of this healthy or maybe sometimes a bit annoying level of impatience that things just don't move fast enough. I've had to kind of learn to adjust in some settings but I think it's about seeing how to connect dots where they haven't been connected before, and make progress toward a vision that you can actually see having an impact at some point in the future. And I think that's what being a catalyst is all about.
How do you navigate? I mean, that sense of impatience is so prevalent in the community, and there's a fine line. You can't get too complacent, or you're not driving enough change. But if you're too impatient, you might be moving too fast and leaving the organization, the system behind. How have you navigated walking that knife's edge?
Yeah, I mean, it's been a learning process and it still is for me. Right. I mean, I think one of the things that I'm not always great at is bringing others along because I sort of, when I get an idea, I get really excited about that idea and I kind of want to force that forward. But you recognize the importance of clearly communicating and articulating your vision, bringing others along with you, collaborating, creating the right coalition of team members, partners, mentors, and others to really help you move your vision forward. So that's always a learning process for me, and it still is today. So I think, that's a large part of, I think, what it takes. And, we all have our blind spots. So
Do you
figure out
have,
what those are.
sorry, do you have a someone or a system or a way that you can sense when you're not sort of straddling that path?
Yeah, I mean, the way I'm fortunate enough to kind of mentor a lot of younger career folks in the sustainability space, and it's probably true in any field, not just sustainability, but often the analogy I use, it really is like pushing a boulder up a hill. And when you're totally exhausted and you feel like it's going to roll back over you, sometimes it slowly starts to roll down the other side and create that momentum that's really exciting. So I think it's really persistence and it's a matter of kind of taking calculated risks, right? I think you always run the risk of maybe over collaboration, over socialization, which can venture into stagnation. So I think it's a lot of it's intuitive, right? And it comes with sort of experience. But I think you get a couple of the right people in your corner, you begin to push your ideas forward. Um, you stop, check yourself, make necessary adjustments when that resistance comes about. And then you just keep moving forward until you really start to see things accelerate.
I love it's something that hasn't come up in other conversations, honestly, is the calculated risks and sometimes the over collaboration and socialization. And I'm wondering, I can imagine how people get there, especially around sustainability, because a lot of people will be in the room like shaking their head, like, who doesn't want to say yes to that, right? But at the same time, it doesn't mean that someone else is helping to pull the trigger. So how do you know? I mean, I hear the burnout part, but how do you know if you're spending too much time on the socialization and bringing people around versus like, let's go get something done soon?
It's a great question. I mean, I sort of think about, we've been fortunate in this field over the course of the last 10 years because I think we've really had some tailwinds. But, when I started my career, I was just talking to a young person on my team. I said, I remember when having sustainability in your title was a scary thing, and we sort of avoided CEOs because we really appeared to be a cost center. It was like, well, what is that? You're the tree hugger, And so it was really kind of a dangerous place to be at one point in time. And now everybody wants it in their title. And it's an exciting, sexy place, which is magnificent and really cool and couldn't be better. But I think sort of how do you know? And I think, you know when you start to feel like a drag on whatever organization that you're in, when you feel like you're not providing value, like
Mm.
you're not able to measure success or the success that you're bringing about those around you. I think that's when you know you're going too slow.
It's fascinating. Like measurements and performance and incentives are so critical to creating change. So, what are some of the biggest challenges that you've had being an executive driving change in large organizations?
Yeah, I would just add to that too, Shannon, and because I am in business, I mean, I don't always mean success like measured by revenue. For instance, it could be change in culture. It could be change in strategy. The way that you measure success or your impacts that you're having as an organization, those could also be successes, right? So I think that's important. A number of challenges. And I think a lot of it comes down to preparation too. I mean, I remember, well, I'll speak about, I worked for a really big company, unnamed at this point, but I remember working for leadership. And this is some years ago when we really started, it was kind of the beginning of kind of the climate change movement and the shareholder movement around ESG, although they didn't really call it ESG yet. And going into an analyst call and being told by a leader, don't worry, we're going to have you there, but no one ever asks about sustainability in any of these calls. So you don't need to worry about it. You probably won't need to say anything. But I had sort of a prepared answer in my head that I had practiced for about 4 years if it ever came up. And one of the biggest shareholders actually asked a question about sustainability and the rise in shareholder resolutions at the time. And the chairperson of the board, the CEO, and the general counsel all looked at each other and no one knew how to answer the question. And I was this unknown guy sitting in the corner and stood up and said, here's what we're doing about that. And it really accelerated my career. And I think even more importantly, it accelerated the investment at that particular company around that movement. So that was a tough time. Like I said, I mean, there were sort of the sustainability dark ages, kind of the early 2000s, where a lot of things weren't happening. So I think that was a tough time. Another tough time is, I worked for a CEO that ran for governor in a big state in the country, and part of their platform was anti-climate change. And then I had to not only convince that person, but the rest of the organization that this was not only important for society, but important for us as a company. And I think was able to make some of that change happen internally to the point where they ended up really becoming an advocate for climate and the importance of climate to drive business value. And that was a big success.
That's a freaking amazing story. Are you kidding? To help us understand how you did that, because if you can do that in that kind of polarized context, it has to be easier in a lot of other contexts.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think part of it is just I'm stubborn, right? So I've always been stubborn. So just really not giving up. Improving your communication skills, I think, is really, really important in this field. I think they're becoming even more important. I think as I kind of emerged from education, all my counselors, and we were constantly being told by professors, you really want to specialize in a given area, become a technical expert, particularly in, the environmental sciences and so on. It's absolutely the opposite advice that I give to young people today, which is you want to be a meter deep and a kilometer wide. You want to have the ability to go deep when you need to. You don't want to be an inch deep or a couple centimeters deep, but you want to be a meter deep, which is why I use that term. And you also need to have breadth. And I think, persistence does pay off. And I think, figure out how to align incentives within an organization. What are the things that other people are measuring their success on? what are the performance driver for that particular organization that you're working for, and figure out how to align the things that you're working on with those elements.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I'm wondering, like, because it is a unique case, I guess for Catalyst in general, but also sustainability people. Like, if you have a CEO, we're not always reporting, or whoever the senior executives, there might be a couple of layers in between us and that person. And things that you said really resonate, which is like understanding their personal motivations or the business motivations, et cetera. But it's not always easy to find those insights. Like, it's not like you have a friend, everyone has a friendly relationship with the CEO or the key stakeholders. So I'm wondering how you've successfully navigated understanding what the motivations were so that you could use your communication skills to speak specifically to get them on board.
It's about, I hate to say it, it's so cliche, but it really is about building relationships, right? And developing your own network within
Yeah.
the organization that you're working in. And I think, developing your own credibility, building your own political capital within an organization, is super important. I'm really fortunate to work for some amazing leaders at the company I work for now at Equinix, and for the first time actually in my career, I work within the office of the chief financial officer, which is a really special place to be for a sustainability professional. You know, we
Incredible.
we talked about it, kind of I can almost talk to a sustainability professional within a company, and if they tell me where they work, I can tell you where they are in the maturity curve along that particular journey. I think things have changed over time, but it's a great place to be.
Well, and I mentioned to you in our earlier conversation, it's so fascinating what you guys have done with green bonds. And now that I understand that you report into the CFO, that makes a lot of sense. Do you want to talk about that for a minute? Because it's not something that a lot of companies are doing.
Yeah, sure. I think it is super innovative. And I think, I really, the woman that I work for, who's the senior vice president of corporate finance, treasury, and sustainability, she's an exceptional leader. And I think it was really her idea and her innovation to bring it about within Equinix, within the company. We're now one of the largest issuers of green bonds in the country. And it's green bonds, for those that aren't aware, it's a type of fixed income investment that finances projects that have positive environmental impact. And you have to create a framework for which types of investments that debt will fund, and then kind of track those investments. And there's a slight marginal benefit that you get from a cost basis by doing that, and driving investment that does have a positive environmental impact. So we're at, I believe, over 5 billion now in terms of overall we've allocated those investments toward. We build data centers at Equinix. That's what we do, build and operate data centers. So you can think we use a lot of energy. So building our buildings in a more sustainable way, operating in a way that reduces our energy and water consumption. These are all critical ways that we power digital infrastructure and power the way that we all sort of communicate, transact, and crunch data today in modern society.
Yeah, and we're not even going to go down the AI rabbit hole, but I saw some articles about you, and it's like there's just more complexity on top of that system. Any other final challenges that you want to share?
I mean, the challenges are many, right? And I mean, I think sustainability is such an exciting space. I mean, it's just really continues to rapidly evolve. And I think, we're at a really critical junction in time. I think, it's really hard to ignore the symptoms of the warming of our planet, things like biodiversity loss and so on. So, I mean, I think, the space needs lots of smart, dedicated folks to get into it in order to really have a positive impact. So I think I would encourage young people or folks that are mid-career or so on, that if you're passionate about it and you think you can have an impact, that jump right in. even if your job doesn't have sustainability in the title, figure
I was
out figure out how you can have an impact in your day-to-day job.
totally. I was just going to say that it's like we need more sustainability professionals, but we need all the other professionals to embrace sustainability. So I love that. And the catalyst, I think that'll totally resonate. So moving on to the next question, what wisdom do you have for other Catalyst executives in the context of we often get called the troublemakers or the disruptors? Yeah, any wisdom to share to help be successful and be seen as successful by your peers?
This is an interesting one. It's probably somewhat controversial. But you know, and I don't know, maybe my boss will hear this, maybe she won't, but um, I think there have been these sort of moments throughout my career where I look back and I think I've had the biggest breakthroughs were probably moments where I actually thought I was going to get fired because I was really, I thought, pushing the envelope and
Mhm.
um, and I think it disrupted the status quo at certain times. But it didn't happen. It's all about calculated risk, right? So I think, the biggest risk in your career is not taking risks.
Totally. It's so true. Any advice for people about the evaluation of that? So my motto is to live without regrets, but a couple of the regrets that I have are about that. Like I was choosing between going bold and saying something to the CEO based on a lot of success, right? It's not like you're going to go bold with no data points and push an issue, like you're going to be building on it, or exiting. And I'm just wondering if you have any guidance for people, especially in middle career. It's like you've got the family, you've got the mortgage, you've got all of this stuff. How do you calculate the risk?
Yeah, that's a tough one. And I think, and the further you are along in your career, and if you've got a family and so on, it's a little bit, those risks become, your risk tolerance tends to go down, I think, sort of over time. I think I've always largely indexed on and centered on, is it absolutely the right thing to do? Is it the right thing for the organization? Does it make sense? Is it the right thing to do? How, aligning your values across all things. Like, so for me,
Mhm.
it's, my environmental values. I enjoy working within businesses. So, and I recognize the fact that, businesses need to move forward. They need to progress in order to be able to afford to have positive impact, right? So they can't be countercurrent to each other. But if those values align and you truly believe that it's the right thing for the organization, then I would absolutely push as hard as you can until you feel like you're up against a wall where you might you might risk your livelihood. Um, but I have found in those few times where I've actually done that, even if I've had to back off, there's been enough of the message that's been heard to where it begins to sort of break through that wall and
Yeah.
replicate in a very positive way. So, I mean, you got to be smart about it, right? I mean, essentially, you don't, you have to be context aware and,
All the
you don't want to go talk about spending hundreds of millions of dollars if a company is, maybe going through a downturn and so on. So, obviously, being context aware is really important. But if values align and it's the right thing to do for the company at the right time and so on, then I think absolutely you need to continue to push forward.
There's a nuance in what you just said, which I really love, which is it's also like I was setting this up as sort of very black and white, but what you shared was you can go there, you might not get 100% approval, or it might feel like you didn't get total support, but as things start to break through, you never know like what you've dislodged or what might move. So I love that framing. All right, fun question, last one. Who's your favorite famous catalyst, past or present, that inspires you, and why do they stand out?
Well, I've got a few of them, I think, particularly in the environmental space.
Great.
So, one's definitely past, but Rachel Carson for sure for me. Younger folks may not know who she is, but she was really I would say, kind of the initial catalyst for the modern environmental movement. She wrote a book called Silent Spring before I was born, well before I
Yeah.
was born, on the harmful effects of pesticides and the interconnection of ecosystems. And it inspired a whole new level of activism and really spurred on the environmental movement. So she's a really important one for me. Another even longer ago, 150 years ago, would be John Muir. His fight to save the Hetch Hetchy Valley, although uh, he failed, resulted in the creation of the national park system within the United States. Huge, huge hero of mine. And then a modern one would be David Attenborough, who has really managed to figure out how to create global awareness through media. So those would be my three.
Amazing. And the storytelling of David Attenborough just reinforces some of the things that you said earlier. Christopher, I could talk to you for hours. Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom with us today.
My pleasure. Thanks so much.
And to our audience, thanks so much for listening. If you'd like to learn more about how to create bold, powerful change in the world, be sure to check out our book, Move Fast, Break Shit, Burn Out, or go to the website at catalystconstellations.com. I know you enjoyed this conversation today, so please take 10 seconds to rate it on iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. And of course, if you have other catalysts in your life, hit the share button and send a link their way. Thanks again.